Chapter 1. The Ghost Front Shivers. December 16, 1944. The Schnee Eifel, Belgium. The fog in the Ardennes is not merely a weather condition. It is a suffocating gray shroud that tastes of wet pine and old iron. You are huddled in a shallow slit in the earth, a foxhole that you spent the better part of 3 hours hacking out of ground as hard as a vein of coal. Your entrenching tool, or army banjo in the cynical tongue of the infantry, bounced off the frozen dirt like it had struck concrete. To your left and right, the men of the 106th Golden Lions Infantry Division are doing the same, shivering, waiting, and wondering why the ghost front feels so heavy with impending doom. For days, the veteran 2nd Infantry Division told you this was a rest sector. They called it a quiet area where green draftees could get acclimated to the rigors of the line. But the silence is deceptive. It is a silence pregnant with the low, distant rumble of thousands of engines idling just beyond the tree line. Then the world ends. The horizon to the east does not glow with the coming sun. It erupts in a terrifying, jagged crown of orange fire. The opening notes of Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's last great gamble, are played on the barrels of 2,000 artillery pieces. The air itself seems to shatter. The first shells are not the whistling rounds you were trained to expect. They are massive, earth-shaking concussions that turn the forest into a blender of jagged wood and white-hot steel. Private Peter Ioso of Company E, 422nd Regiment, has been out in the snow since 6 p.m. the previous night. His clothing is a cycle of freezing and thawing, a wet, stiff skin that offers no warmth. As the bombardment begins, he watches the world dissolve. The 90-minute barrage causes mass casualties before a single German soldier is even sighted. You can feel the vibration of the 150mm howitzers in your very marrow, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that signals the arrival of 3 entire German armies, 290,000 men charging toward 80,000 unsuspecting Americans. The sensory experience of the front line is immediate and visceral. It is the smell of cordite and pulverized brick, the sight of tree bursts raining down hot metal fragments and splinters into the very foxholes that were supposed to provide safety. For the men of the 106th, the ghost front has just become a slaughterhouse. As the barrage lifts, the fog remains, but now it is choked with the smoke of burning half-tracks and the screams of the wounded. You look toward the trees, expecting to see a structured military advance. Instead, you see phantoms. Vague figures in white snowsuits flit through the evergreens, whooping and screaming like something out of a nightmare as they dance through the timber. The realization hits you like a physical blow. You are not just being attacked, you are being hunted by a force that has achieved the impossible. Total surprise. Chapter 2. The Encirclement and the Choice. The chaos of the initial hours is a masterclass in the breakdown of military cohesion. For the Golden Lions, the transition from a rest sector to the epicenter of a blitzkrieg is too rapid for the mind to process. General Alan Jones, the divisional commander, finds himself struggling to grasp the scale of the disaster. His regiments, the 422nd and 423rd, are being bypassed on both flanks by the rapid pincers of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division. The terrain of the Ardennes, which Hitler's generals Rundstedt and Model argued was too difficult for a Grand Slam offensive, is proving to be a double-edged sword. While the roads are slippery ribbons of ice that send German tanks skidding into ditches, the same narrow, choked fire breaks prevent the Americans from organizing a fluid defense. You feel the isolation in your foxhole. Communication lines are cut. The radio, which had been silent for 2 months, is now a frantic jumble of messages trying to determine where the main thrust is. In the woods of the Schnee Eifel, the fear is no longer abstract. It is the sound of tank treads reverberating on the frozen roads, a metallic clatter that feels like it's grinding over your own ribs. You are out of food, you are out of water, and for 4 days, no resupply reaches your position. By December 19th, the situation for the 422nd and 423rd Regiments reaches a breaking point. Surrounded, with aid stations filled with wounded who cannot be evacuated, the regimental commanders, Colonels Deschenaux and Cavender, face a choice that will haunt American military history. They have no armor, no air support because the soup of the fog has grounded the Allied planes, and their artillery has run dry. In a moment of surreal irony, a German delegation approaches under a white flag. Corporal Stanley Wojtusik of the 422nd recalls the spark of hope. "We all saw that white flag and we thought they were surrendering to us. But the reality is the opposite. The Germans are demanding the surrender of 2 entire American regiments. Approximately 7,000 men, the heart of the 106th Division, are ordered to lay down their arms. It is a mass capitulation that leaves the division effectively destroyed within 72 hours of its first combat encounter. As you drop your rifle into the snow, the shame is as cold as the wind. You see your fellow lion men lining up, their faces expressionless, their eyes already beginning to glaze over with the 1,000-yard stare. But while the regiments on the hills surrender, a different kind of war is being waged in the towns and at the crossroads. The sacrifice of the 106th, though categorized as a disaster, has done something the German High Command didn't expect. It has bought time. The Grand Slam is already behind schedule, and the roads to the Meuse are still blocked by the stubborn remnants of a division that was supposedly raw draftees. Chapter 3. The Urban Grave of Stalingrad. September 1942. The Barricade Factory, Stalingrad. While the Ardennes was a war of ice and trees, the struggle for survival on the Eastern Front was a descent into an urban inferno that stripped away the last vestiges of 20th-century civilization. If you were a German soldier in Friedrich Paulus's Sixth Army, your world had shrunk to the size of a single room, a pile of rubble, or a shattered sewer pipe. The diary entries of William Hoffman provide a chilling, day-by-day record of this psychological and physical disintegration. In July, his writing was infused with the arrogance of the conqueror. "We shall soon be in Stalingrad. The Russians will be crushed." By September, the tone shifts into something skeletal and desperate. He describes the fighting for a grain elevator, a massive concrete monolith where the Germans fought for weeks just to clear a single floor. "The Russians are not men, but some kind of creatures made of cast iron," he writes. "They do not know the meaning of the word retreat." Stalingrad was the rat war, Rattenkrieg. You can almost feel the grit of pulverized brick between your teeth as you crawl through the ruins of an apartment complex. Every window is a potential sniper's nest. Every cellar is a fortress. The sensory environment is a cacophony of constant bombardment and the sharp, unpredictable crack of small arms fire echoing off the hollow shells of buildings. Soviet General Chukov's 62nd Army had been ordered to hug the German lines, staying so close that the Luftwaffe could not bomb the Russians without hitting their own men. This meant the front line was often just a thin interior wall. You could hear the enemy breathing on the other side. You could hear them talking. You could smell their tobacco and their sweat. The civilians of Stalingrad were trapped in this meat grinder. Stalin had forbidden their evacuation, famously declaring that soldiers do not fight for empty cities. Consequently, as many as 500,000 civilians remained, eking out a living in the cellars while street fighting raged overhead. You might be firing your MG-42 from a kitchen window while a woman in the corner tries to soothe a crying child in the darkness of the basement below. The fear at Stalingrad was not the fear of a grand offensive. It was the fear of the unknown in the dark. A report in a German officer's notebook describes a 3-day struggle for a single factory building. When it was finally cleared, they found only 20 Soviet soldiers who had fought to the last man. The realization that the entire city, stretching for miles along the Volga, would have to be cleared room by room caused German morale to crater. Luck, not skill, became the primary factor in whether you lived to see the next sunrise. And as the winter of 1942 approached, the fear of the Russian soldier was slowly replaced by a much older terror, the slow, agonizing realization that you were being consumed by the very city you had come to conquer. Chapter 4. The Screaming Mimes and the Tree Bursts. December 20th, 1944, near Hattin, Belgium. Back in the Ardennes, the sensory assault of the front line has evolved. For the American soldier, fear now has a very specific sound. It is a high-pitched, terrifying shriek that cuts through the roar of conventional artillery. The sound of the Nebelwerfer, or the screaming Mime. Introduced as a smoke thrower, the Nebelwerfer 41 is a 6-barreled rocket launcher that can fire 6 150mm projectiles in just 10 seconds. When they are launched, they leave a prominent exhaust trail that kicks up clouds of snow and debris, but it is the noise in flight that breaks men's spirits. It sounds like a woman's scream, a mechanical howl that rises in pitch until the moment of impact. You are crouched in your foxhole, pressing your face into the freezing mud, trying to become part of the earth itself. The concussion of the rockets is so powerful it can collapse enemy positions without a direct hit. If you are in the thick, evergreen forests of the Hurtgen or the Ardennes, the danger is multiplied. The Germans have mastered the tree burst. They fuse their shells to explode upon contact with the dense 100-foot pine canopy. Standard training taught you to dive to the ground when artillery began. In the woods, that training is a death sentence. When you dive to the ground, you expose your entire back and head to a rain of hot shell fragments and splinters coming straight down from the treetops. You learn the hard way that the only way to survive is to hug the trunk of a massive fir tree, exposing only the steel of your helmet to the vertical rain of metal. The environment of the Ardennes in 1944 is weird and wild, a green cave of interlocking lower limbs where the sun rarely reaches the forest floor. It is a world of perpetual twilight and dripping water. Every trail is a potential minefield. Every firebreak is a pre-sighted kill zone for German 88mm guns. For the men of the 3rd Armored Division, like radio operator William B. Ruth, the fear is compounded by the fog of war. Visibility is so poor that drivers have to sit on the fenders of their half-tracks to see the blackout lights of the vehicle ahead. You move through the dark under pewter skies, streaked with the ominous red glow of V-1 flying bombs headed for Antwerp. You are fighting off chronic colds, your breath comes in short, irregular gasps, and your teeth grind against each other as you wait for the next barrage. The war has ceased to be about ideology. It is now a struggle for warmth, for dry socks, and for the silence that signifies the screaming Mimes have moved on to another sector. Chapter 5. The Hilltop Stand of Hogan's 400. December 22nd, 1944, Marcoret, Belgium. The story of Task Force Hogan is the ultimate distillation of the bitter battle for billets and the desperate gamble for survival. Led by Samuel Hogan, the youngest tank battalion commander in the U.S. Army, this reinforced unit of the 3rd Armored Division has been pushed into a speed bump role to slow the German tide. After a series of night movements and sharp skirmishes with the 116th Panzer Division, Hogan's column arrives bleary-eyed at the hilltop village of Marcoret. They are surrounded. They are out of fuel. They are low on ammunition. The village, sitting on high ground, offers a defensive advantage, but it is also a cage. You are one of the 400 men, later dubbed Hogan's 400, watching the German Tiger tanks coil around the base of the hill. The situation is grim. Medical supplies are exhausted. The The 54th Armored Field Artillery tries to shoot bandages and plasma into the town using shell casings, but the efforts fail. C-47 transport planes attempt resupply drops, but 6 are shot down by German flak over La Roche. One radio operator, André Mongeau, manages to jump from his burning plane and lands right in the middle of Hogan's perimeter, trapped with the very men he was trying to save. A German officer visits Hogan under a flag of truce, demanding surrender. Hogan's Texan resolve is unwavering. "I said we had orders to fight to the death, and as I was a soldier, I would obey my orders. If they want this village, let them come and take it." But by Christmas Eve, General Maurice Rose realizes the task force is a lost cause unless they abandon their heavy steel. The order comes through the radio: destroy all equipment in place and return on foot to American lines. For a tanker, this is a heartbreaking command. You have lived in your Sherman tank for months. It is your home, your shield, and your only source of warmth. Now, you have to kill it. The sabotage must be silent. You can't use explosives or thermite grenades because the Germans are only 200 yards away in the woods. You pour sugar into the gasoline tanks. You run the engines without oil until the pistons weld themselves to the cylinders with a dying metallic groan. You remove the firing pins from the main guns and bury them in the frozen mud. As night falls on Christmas, you smear thick black tank grease over your face to hide the pale reflection of your skin in the snow. You abandon your heavy steel helmet, the battle bowler, and put on a knit cap so you can hear the snap of a twig more clearly. You are no longer a tanker. You are a ghost in the trees, embarking on a 14-hour trek through mountains, crawling with the SS. Chapter 6. The Silent March and the Bayonet. December 25, 1944. The woods near Marcoret. The breakout of Hogan's 400 is a masterclass in tension. You are moving in groups of 20, spaced at 20-minute intervals, navigating by nothing but the stars and a compass. Every breath feels like it's being amplified by the freezing air. The snow is a grotesque blanket, churned by boots and trucks, and you have to step carefully to avoid the frozen corpses that dot the landscape like discarded statues. PFC Bud Nelson recalls the smell, the awful scent of cordite and decay that clings to the Ardennes. You are stumbling over roots, your fingers so numb you aren't sure you can pull the trigger on your M1 Garand if you need to. Suddenly, the column halts. Up ahead, a German sentry stands by a motorcycle, his breath puffing in the moonlight. He hears something. He challenges the darkness. "Halt!" In that frozen second, the fate of 400 men hangs in the balance. If a shot is fired, the entire 116th Panzer Division will descend on your lightly armed column. But Staff Sergeant Lee B. Porter doesn't wait for an order. He slips out of the line, moving through the shadows with the grace of a predator. He circles behind the sentry, draws his bayonet, the frog sticker, and neutralizes the German silently. The column moves on. For 14 hours you march. You are bleary-eyed, fighting off the urge to simply sit down in the snow and sleep, a sleep that would be your last. At one point, PFC Nelson and his friend Cliff get separated from the main group. They find a German motorcycle with a sidecar, kill the rider, and spend the rest of the night touring the countryside in the enemy's own vehicle, laughing hysterically at the absurdity of it all as they try to figure out the damnedest contraption. By morning, the Hogans reach friendly lines. They are blackened, exhausted, and gaunt, but they are alive. Their story is flashed around the world within hours, a rare moment of American triumph in the dark December of the Bulge. Hogan himself is the last man in, grinning to hide the hurt and memory of the wounded and the medics he had to leave behind in Marcoret. But as the Hogans receive their hot chow and dry socks, the fear doesn't leave. It just changes shape. You realize that while you were marching through the woods, thousands of your fellow Lion men from the 106th were being loaded into boxcars. And for those who stayed on the line, like George Copico, the war was about to get even more personal. Chapter 7. The Million-Dollar Wound. January 6, 1945, near Wiltz, Luxembourg. Survival on the front line is often measured by the quality of your million-dollar wound, an injury serious enough to get you sent home, but not serious enough to kill you. For George Copico, a machine gun squad leader in the 26th Infantry Division, that wound comes in the form of a jagged piece of German steel. The Germans have pinned your unit down in a thicket of pines. You are lugging a 103-pound water-cooled Browning M1917A1, a beast of a weapon that can fire 500 rounds a minute as long as the water in the cooling jacket doesn't freeze. Suddenly, a shell explodes in the treetops. You feel a massive, blunt impact on your face. You are stunned, your head ringing like a struck bell. You reach up and feel something jagged sticking out of your gums. You spit out a mouthful of blood and teeth. A half-inch of hot shrapnel is embedded in your cheek. In the strange logic of the front, this is a victory. You are tagged and moved away from the shelling, starting the long journey back through the medical evacuation chain. You pass through a battalion aid station, then a regimental station, each move taking you further from the screaming Mimis. You find yourself in an ancient Luxembourgian castle that has been converted into an evacuation hospital. The halls are hushed in the evening light, filled with the wounded on litters. Some die while waiting. When it is your turn, a doctor probes your cheek. It is Dr. Hemingway, a man who knew you as a newspaper boy back in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. The coincidence is jarring. The war has brought the familiar into the heart of the nightmare. From the castle, you are sent to Bar-le-Duc, France, a hillside covered in thousands of tents. Here you encounter your cousin, George Romanchek, another fragment of home in the middle of a world at war. He helps you get transferred to a hospital in Southampton, England, where for the first time in months you lie in a bed with clean sheets. But as the physical pain fades, the psychological pressure mounts. You look around the ward and see men who are blind, deaf, and badly burned. You feel a crushing sense of shame for your bloody cheek. And when the time comes to return to the front, you realize you will do anything to stay in the world of clean sheets and hot meals, even if it means becoming a fraud. Chapter 8. The Carpenter's Fraud and the Return to the Abyss. February 1945, Southampton, England. The fear of the front line does not dissipate once you are in a hospital bed. It merely transforms into a dread of going back into action. For George Copico, this dread leads to the Carpenter fraud. To avoid being sent back to the meat grinder of the 26th Division, George claims to be a skilled carpenter. He is issued an apron and a tool belt. The only problem, George doesn't know the first thing about carpentry. He spends his days pounding nails into scrap wood and patching holes in barracks, constantly looking over his shoulder, terrified that an officer will ask him to build something complex. The jig is up when a colonel orders him to build an exquisite cabinet. Desperate, George slips out into the local English village and pays professional workmen to build the cabinet for him. The quality is so high that the colonel is thrilled and promptly orders 4 more. George realizes he can't keep the ruse going forever. The guilt of his buddies still dying in the snow, combined with the risk of exposure, finally breaks him. In March 1945, he returns to his unit. When he arrives, the reality of the war hits him again. Only a handful of the original 186 men are left. The faces are new, the names are different. The golden lions he once knew have been replaced by FNGs, fucking new ties, who don't know how to survive a tree burst or how to rub their feet to prevent trench foot. As George moves through Bavaria and into Austria, the war enters its final, surreal phase. He sees white sheets in the windows of German homes. He sees stacks of Wehrmacht weapons in the town squares, abandoned by a military that has finally run out of children and old men to throw into the fire. He even shares a shot of terrible vodka with a Russian soldier upon hearing of the German surrender. But the fear doesn't leave. It has become a permanent resident in his mind. He has survived the physical iron, but the thousand-yard stare has already begun to claim his internal world. May 1945. The end of the road. The thousand-yard stare is the telltale sign that the human nervous system has reached its absolute limit. It is an unfocused, despondent, and weary gaze that transcends simple fatigue. It is the look of a man who has seen and heard and felt too much, whose conscious brain has started to shut down to prevent total psychological disintegration. Originally termed shell shock by Captain Charles Myers in 1915, the condition was first thought to be a physical concussion of the nervous system caused by exploding shells. But by WW2, the Army realized that many men who were never near an explosion suffered the same symptoms: uncontrollable tremors, stammering, sensory numbness, and irritable heart. The artist Tom Lee captured this in his painting, The 2,000-Yard Stare. He describes a Marine whose mind had crumbled in battle. His jaws hung and his eyes were like two black empty holes in his head. This is the face of combat stress reaction. The symptoms of this bloodless affliction are devastating. Men start trembling so badly they can't hold their rifles. They become physically incapable of movement, falling to the ground paralyzed with terror, burying their faces in the grass and grasping at the earth. Some react with collective panic, whole units simply walking slowly to the rear with half-dazed expressions on their faces. One soldier at Bastogne recalled his own internal collapse. "I had been living in such miserable, bitter cold and scared. I didn't really care what happened. A click of the safety and a tug of the trigger and my suffering would be over." He had to force himself to put the safety back on, terrified he would kill himself on impulse. The Army used the PIE principles, proximity, immediacy, expectancy, to treat these men, hoping a few days of sleep and hot food near the front would reset their nervous systems. But for many, the damage was indelible. They returned to a nation that valued life, only to find that their own lives seemed to have little value in the abysses of places like Peleliu or Stalingrad. They were scarred at the very core of human existence, having lost the childish innocence that man is basically good. Chapter 10. The Boxcars of the Golden Lions. December 20th, 1944 to May 1945, Germany. While men like Hogan and Kokiko fought for survival on the line, the 7,000 Golden Lions of the 106th Division who surrendered on the Schneeeifel began a different kind of nightmare. They were stripped of their watches, mittens, and food by German guards. They were marched 45 miles to rail yards, their boots often worn through to the skin. Then came the boxcars. These were the 40 and 8 cars, designed to hold 40 men or 8 horses. The Germans packed 60 to 70 men into each one. There was no room to sit, no room to lie down. You stood for days in your own filth as the train rattled deeper into the heart of the Reich. The fear here was of a different kind. It was the fear of maggot soup, a thin, watery broth that you initially refused to eat, but by the third day you found yourself craving. It was the fear of the Allied planes overhead. Thinking the trains were carrying German troops or supplies, American P-47s would strafe the boxcars, the friendly fire killing men who had already survived the worst of the Ardennes. Some of these men, like those from the 106th, were sent to Berga, a subcamp of Buchenwald. Here, the dogface became a slave laborer, digging tunnels for underground ammunition factories. They were starved, beaten, and worked until their bodies were skeletal. They survived on potato peelings thrown to them by local German women who had compassion for these soldiers. 20% of the Americans at Berga died before liberation. When the war finally ended on May 8, 1945, the victory was hollow for many. You had survived the iron of the 88-millimeter guns, the ice of the Ardennes, and the starvation of the Stalags. You had seen the 1,000-yard stare in your own reflection. As the news of the surrender reached you, you didn't cheer. You simply sat down and breathed. You had lived, but the boy who had stepped into the fog of the Schneeeifel on December 16, 1944, was gone forever. The story of the front line is not a story of glory. It is a story of endurance. It is the story of Lee Porter's bayonet, George Kokiko's $1,000,000 wound, and the silent engines of Hogan's tanks. It is a reminder that in the face of total fear, the human spirit doesn't always break. Sometimes it just learns to survive in the dark.